The government nationalises the East Coast mainline after National Express warns of cash shortages. Good evening. Adding to our portfolio of loss-making banks, tonight we are to own again what we once owned before, some more of Britain's railway. National Express has thrown in the towel on the East Coast franchise, saying it's going to run out of money. Ministers are threatening to take the company's two other rail franchises into public ownership too. John Prescott greeted the news by urging the government to take over the lot. Also tonight, British forces in Afghanistan have killed at least 104 civilians since 2007. Tonight, under Freedom of Information Act, we reveal some of the true cost of Britain's engagement in the Afghan war. Plus, fit for purpose, how the House of Lords is wondering whether they want Alan Sugar in their midst. And the last undiscovered body on the moor, why the remains of Keith Bennett, victim of Mara Hindley and Ian Brady's Moors murders, will almost certainly never be found.
He knows where he is, and he's held it all these years, and I've had to suffer. He's got rights and I've not.
And the other headlines tonight, Peter Mandelson forced to put his plans to part privatised Royal Mail on hold. But was it the Labour opposition or the economic climate that did it? A new medal, the Elizabeth Cross, created for all the families of armed forces personnel killed on operations or by terrorists since the Second World War. And a straight sets victory as Andy Murray cruises past his unseeded opponent in 1 hour and 41 minutes for a place in the semi-finals.
Is it nationalisation by stealth? The government today seized back the East Coast rail service from National Express as it became clear the private company could not meet its financial obligations. National Express had made an ambitious £1 billion bid to win the East Coast line, but the recession blew a hole in its plans. Now the company and ministers are trading insults. The former Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott says the franchise should now be left in public ownership. Here's our economics correspondent, Faisal Islam.
Right now it says National Express. It will soon be a nationalised express. The coach company that bid hundreds of millions a year to run the London to Edinburgh East Coast Main Line threatened to dodge its hefty fare. National Express blames the recession, but the government's playing hardball, signalling a future back in the state sector for the famous East Coast service connecting Britain's two main capitals and three financial centres.
The decision of National Express to break their contract is regrettable and disappointing. All other rail companies are fulfilling their contracts despite the economic downturn. It is simply unacceptable to reap the benefits of contracts when times are good, only to walk away from them when times become more challenging.
Just 2 years ago, National Express agreed an eye-watering deal to run the East Coast line, on the face of it, Britain's most lucrative train service. After a small subsidy in the first year, National Express was due to pay £140 million this year, shooting up to a mammoth £470 million in the final year of the franchise, a quintupling of annual payments. So National Express was on hook for nearly £1.9 billion, worth £1.4 billion adjusted for inflation, on the basis that passenger numbers would grow by 9 to 10% per year.
They were very optimistic about the traffic growth they'd experience in the future on the railways, and therefore the revenues they get from passengers. They didn't take proper account of the possibility that the economy would turn down. It has turned down. Now revenues are nowhere near what they expected, and they're in difficulty meeting their commitments to the government to pay for the right to continue to run the franchise.
But this is not the first time exactly the same problem befell the East Coast Line when GNER had to surrender its £1.3 billion franchise. The government celebrated both auction results at the time, but the suspicion then, seemingly proven now, that train operating companies bid too high to win contracts, knowing that if things went wrong, it'd be the public sector's problem. Sir Richard Branson, whose Virgin Trains lost out to the National Express bid, said that Virgin had lost to people who've put in unrealistic bids. This can't be right, he said tonight.
For the passengers, there's no real difference. And for the government, it's the same old story too, because National Express is the latest in a litany of examples of this type. The London Underground Tube public-private partnership, Metronet, other rail franchises and PFIs, where in the good times the private sector makes profits, and in the bad times the public sector is left holding the baby.
It's this man, Richard Bowker, at the centre of this. He resigned as National Express's chief executive today, heading for a job in the Middle East. But he was one of the architects of the franchise system as Tony Blair's head of the Strategic Rail Authority, before turning poacher at National Express and lodging that huge bid. In recent weeks, he'd been trying to lower the agreed fees with the Department of Transport, even floating an estimated £100 million buyout fee last night. But the Transport Secretary refused, fearing a rush of rail companies trying the same trick. So the finances of the railways are looking increasingly stretched. This year, all the train operators combined will receive £1.6 billion in subsidies from the government. But this is planned to drop by 2/3 over the next 5 years, as train companies are supposed to generate more revenues. And government grants to Network Rail for major line improvements also fall from £3.4 billion this year to just under £3 billion in 5 years' time. So with rail tracks renationalised and private train companies seemingly incapable of making a profit, is this a return to a government-owned age of the train?
This morning, coming back down to London from Leeds, I get on a nationalised train. It's got here 4 minutes early and the staff have got a smile on their face. Yes, I'm glad. I think what the government's done is exactly right, not giving to the black bale, asking for more money. This is a public service, it should remain so. I hope they keep it that way.
Indeed, there is the very real prospect of National Express's other 2 profitable franchises being seized by Lord Adonis as punishment for breaching their contract. The company claims they're all separate legal entities, so this could yet end up in the courts. So far, though, the plan is for public ownership of a year. Virgin Trains is believed to be interested, but the fee is likely to fall far short of National Express's doomed bid.
Faisal Islam. Ray O'Toole is the Chief Operating Officer for National Express. I spoke with him earlier and began by asking him why the company should be allowed to keep on running 2 other franchises in addition to the East Coast Railway.
We've had this franchise since December 2007. It was at the bottom of the Performance League table for performance. It had a poor customer satisfaction rating, and we now sit at the top of the Performance League table in terms of its performance, and a 5% increase on the customer satisfaction rating. So, all by the financials, we have delivered a good railway, and Lord Adonis has made that very point. You know, we have delivered a good railway, and the other 2 franchises we operate are very clearly are delivering everything and all the franchise commitments, as is East Coast at this point in time.
Yes, but I mean, who is to guarantee that you will keep them going for the full duration of your contract?
Well, I think it would be fair to say that one of those franchises is in what we call a revenue share. And this is a revenue share that the government have to put into the pot after the fourth anniversary of the operation of the franchises. And there are about 5 or 6 franchises in the rail industry at the moment who are getting revenue support directly from the government. So you can see from that statistic that the bids, you know, never envisaged this coming along, and the government are actually paying for those at the moment.
There's something odd, though, today, isn't there? Because, I mean, National Express was a bus company. I mean, it didn't do trains until you got hold of Richard Bowker, who knew a great deal about trains. He'd run the Strategic Rail Authority. Now, on the very day when you lose the franchise, he's left the company.
Well, if I could just focus on Richard's leaving the company, quite clearly he's had an opportunity put in front of him. He's considered that opportunity, and he's taken this opportunity and decided to go to it. And he thinks it's the best thing for his career. What I'd like to say on record is to thank Richard for all his success while he's been at National Express, and we wish him the best of luck in his new role.
The timing is embarrassing at the very least.
Well, I think it's just coincidental is probably the best way I would describe it. And even before Richard, National Express...
Quite a road accident of a coincidence, isn't it?
No, I don't.
The moment at which you need him pretty badly, if today's anything to judge.
Well, I think, as I was going on to say, National Express was in the railways and has been in it since the turn of privatisation. And let's not forget, privatisation has been good for the British Rail. You know, we've seen double-digit growth, never seen growth like this under British Rail.
All right, but if I were to press you, I mean, would you run a railway like this? I mean, is this the way you would configure it?
Well, I think the models have been up for review and renewal, or, you know, to be looked at and reviewed all the time. And I'm sure as a consequence of this circumstances that has come about, the government will no doubt have another review to see whether actually the franchise model is the best way to do it.
John Prescott got off your train today at King's Cross and said, good, we'll nationalise the whole thing.
Well, I think that's for a decision for the government to make. I would actually argue that privatisation of the railways has seen better customer service. It's been double-digit growth since privatisation, and the customers are better off. Performance is better under privatisation than it has ever been before.
Now, Lord Mandelson has confirmed his plan to part privatise Royal Mail has stalled. More than 140 Labour MPs signed a motion against the idea, but the Business Secretary today insisted the decision was entirely to do with market conditions being rather poor. We asked for an interview.
We have thoroughly tested the market to see who is interested in partnership. But economic circumstances, I need hardly point out, are extremely difficult. And I've always been clear that we would only do a deal with the private sector if it represented value for money for the taxpayer.
Well, we did ask for an interview with Lord Mandelson, but he declined. But the Shadow Business Secretary, Ken Clarke, joins us now from Westminster. Well, which do you think it is, Mr Clarke? The fact there wasn't enough parliamentary time, or that they really can't find a way through this economic crisis?
I don't think it's either. I'm afraid I don't believe either, which tends to be my reaction to quite a lot of things the government's been saying recently. The lack of parliamentary time argument being floated 2 days ago is ridiculous. The government's insisting on sending Parliament away for 3 months because it's got nothing to do. And we, the opposition, have been offering parliamentary time for the second reading of a bill which the government's already taken through the Lords. Market conditions today are no different from market conditions last Sunday, when Peter Mandelson said he was committed to the policy. There was a crisis in the Royal Mail. It was going to go ahead. The truth is, Peter saved the Prime Minister. Peter runs most of the government. He's got the biggest department, but he can't persuade the Cabinet, and he can't persuade the Labour Party in the House of Commons to support his flagship bill for the Royal Mail.
Well,
there's no policy now. No policy on the Royal Mail at all.
Well, so what's the Tory policy?
Well, we think it does require private capital. We think it requires new management. We do think the Hooper report, which tied that together very carefully with new regulation, that showed the way forward.
So you would do effectively what Peter Mandelson wanted to do?
Well, that's why we were offering to support the bill, and we've been supporting it constructively throughout the House of Lords, and we thought, in the circumstances, the best thing to get a modern mail system in the future was to support this policy. He could have got it through with our votes.
What's your
but
estimate?
It's the crisis inside the Labour Party that stopped him proceeding.
What's your estimate then of what this might cost the Post Office in terms of, the immediate future? I mean, how parlous is its condition?
I'm very worried because you only have to look what Peter Mandelson's been saying to realise how parlous its decision is. For 12 years, this government's done nothing about a declining business. Now, that decline is now accelerated. It was losing its business at about 6 or 7% a year. That's probably going up to 10% now. It's about to fall back into loss again. It has an enormous black hole in its pension fund, and it's got to put more into that to put it right. And it needs part privatisation. It needs modernisation. Why should the British have one of the old-fashioned mail systems of the Western world? Why shouldn't we have one of the most competitive in Europe?
Well, the price of part...
We're going back to doing nothing, and the next year is going to be very difficult for the mail.
The price of part privatisation is clearly dropping by the minute. I mean, it's going to be lucky to find anyone to pick it up anyway.
Well, that's right. That's why all this argument about market conditions is such nonsense. It makes it sound as though we'll wait a little bit longer and the taxpayers can get a lot more for this business. Well, I'm afraid I don't believe that. What's happened, left in this parlous state, hung out to dry, the Royal Mail is just as likely to lose value further as it is to gain it. It's not the market conditions. I'm afraid the internal state of the Labour Party is black, it's turbulent, they're plotting against each other. They can't take decisions on anything that's difficult. They put off a public spending review, they put off privatisation of the Royal Mail. What are they doing but just putting out leaflets about building a better Britain which just contain think tank slogans?
Ken Clarke, thank you very much for joining us. Over 100 Afghan civilians killed by the British Army in just 18 months. That's the grim statistic obtained exclusively by Channel 4 News under the Freedom of Information Act. The figures, covering December 2007 to May 2009, show that of the claims for compensation from the British Army for civilian deaths in Helmand, southern Afghanistan, 104 claims have been paid out or are still being processed, but a further 113 claims have been rejected outright. Human rights workers point out that the numbers of claims made represent a small fraction of the full civilian death toll in a lawless province, said to be two-thirds under Taliban control. But they do provide a glimpse of the human cost of Britain's campaign there and perhaps explain why many believe the battle for hearts and minds may already be lost. This report from our Asia correspondent, Nick Payton-Walsh, does contain some distressing images from the very start.
The fury of a mob in British-controlled Helmand. Death to the west, the government, they cry. This, by NATO's own admission, is why they're far from winning in Afghanistan. These men are parents. An airstrike has just hit. It was meant for the Taliban, but struck a populated area. Civilians. This is the gruesome aftermath. Fathers left with the remains of their children.
They've completely destroyed us by bombing and flattened 4 houses. NATO say this is Taliban, but look, are these small children Taliban?
This is what it looks like just after a bomb hits. Heavy firepower is meant to dislodge the Taliban, but it too often ends up making their grip here stronger. Channel 4 News has obtained for the first time under the Freedom of Information Act documents that detail the sheer extent of compensation paid by the British Army for civilian deaths in Helmand. They reveal they've paid off or are still processing claims for at least 104 civilian deaths that happened in just the last 18 months. They've also rejected claims for at least another 113, and they've paid as little as $210 for the death of a woman this January. British troops are still on the offensive, but these claims are made in an anarchic region that's two-thirds controlled by the Taliban, where these people last week fled the constant violence, and where lodging a complaint with NATO must be a luxury few can afford. These government figures are, many think, however, just the tip of the iceberg, and they begin to explain why Britain's slowly losing popular support. Grana's story tells you more. Aged 12, she doesn't even know who the Taliban are. A NATO airstrike in British-controlled Kajaki this February killed, she says, her mother and 5 brothers and sisters.
We haven't committed any crime. We're innocent. I have no idea why they bombed us. They bomb anywhere they like.
The blast also took most of her left arm and right leg. Her uncle doesn't talk of compensation, but of justice for the British he insists are to blame. She, however, is just getting used to this new life.
Initially, my whole body was in deep pain, but my foot still aches now.
For others, just trying to get compensation can be yet another insult to injury. This woman's son was killed 6 months ago by bombing. Now she's on the street, outside the Red Crescent building, with her only reminder of him, trying to lodge a claim.
No one let us near the authorities or the governor's house. The soldiers take our papers and tell us to go and wait.
These men have also lost relatives and tried to get compensation, but they know it's hazardous. You need a government ID card to claim, and that's not something you want the Taliban to find on you.
We are stopped and searched by the Taliban. A few days ago, the Taliban made someone swallow 2 ID cards. These cards. Look.
There are over 2,000 claims for anything from damage to a digital camera to child fatalities. But the documents don't give rationale for what sometimes seems confusing decisions. In Musakala 2 years ago, a huge claim including 15 dead children was flatly rejected. But there, a year later, the apparent death of 2 children got a payout of $10,000. And $700 was paid out both for the demolishing of a house's outer wall, but also, in one case, for someone's son being killed.
It's hard to work out what the logic is often. When it comes to the British payouts, what they tend to prefer is paying out for property damage, but it's quite difficult to get money from the British when they've killed somebody in the event of a fatality. And the reason for that seems to be that they set a very high bar for investigating and proving that somebody has died, which in the context of Afghanistan is very difficult. People are buried very quickly. There isn't a forensic team. So I think their expectations of proof are too high.
A Ministry of Defence spokesman said in a statement,
"Compensation claims brought against British forces are considered on the basis of whether the MOD has a legal liability to pay compensation. Where there is a proven legal liability, compensation is paid. Despite every effort to target only insurgents, there are times when the ordinary people of Afghanistan are inadvertently harmed. We particularly regret incidents where civilians are harmed as a result of actions by international forces. Even one death is one too many."
American troops are arriving in force to shore up failing security in Helmand. Britain insists its campaign has seen success, but these figures hint at the scale of its toll on civilians and how each brutal battle to win ground has slowly been losing them the war for hearts and minds.
Nick Payton-Walsh with that exclusive report. Well, just before we came on air, the Armed Forces Minister Bill Rammell came to the studio. I put it to him that, as our report stated, Human Rights Watch believes the true number of civilian dead is far greater than we've been told. Would he accept that?
No, I wouldn't accept that. But what I would say is we rightly, in my view, go out of our way to advertise the compensation procedures. We do that through Governor Mangle's local Shura structure to try and communicate it effectively. We have a Ministry of Defence office in Lashkar, the capital of Helmand province, to process claims. There is an appeal procedure. And even where legal liability is not proven, we will also give out goodwill payments as well. But there is
actually, one could say, to be absolutely honest, given the price of some of the bombs that we're dropping and the rest of it, actually, hearts and minds would be won if you made much less fuss about all this and just paid out a lot of money.
Well, let me be clear. We are engaged in a hearts and minds exercise. And my view about wanting to do everything we possibly can to avoid civilian casualties is not only a moral view, but it's a practical political view as well, that if we want to take people with us, then we need to ensure that we are doing that.
Well, that takes us to Musikala, for example, in summer 2007, an incident involving the deaths of 5 adults and 15 children resulted in a claim for $100,000, which was rejected. Now, the next year, in the same town, there was one which was paid out. Now, it seems that if the people of a village are convinced that this number of people have been killed, it's probably wise just to pay out the money and get going.
Well, hold on, John. Neither you or I know the detailed circumstances of those individual claims. I will acknowledge that there is a tension here in that there's an expectation in the local population who are used to settling disputes by local custom or by religious arbitration. That is not the system that we operate by.
But there's something much bigger in play here. There is this problem that we are killing civilians. And basically, if we're trying to win on behalf of the very people that we're killing, we obviously have to go very much more than the extra mile to try and sort this out. Now, you've said big measures are being taken to try and prevent these deaths. Nevertheless, when they happen, what Human Rights Watch is saying is we set the bar too high for people to get compensation.
I don't believe that is the case. We go out of our way to advertise the opportunities for compensation. But look, I hugely regret any civilian casualty, but we are engaged in an incredibly difficult battle with the Taliban. We're there under a United Nations mandate. We're there as part of a coalition of 41 different countries. And we're actually, despite some of the things that are said, there with the will and support of the Afghan government and its people. The last independent opinion poll that I saw still showed a clear majority of ordinary Afghanis saying that they wanted the international presence there because they were terrified out of their wits about what the Taliban would do to them.
Well, is there a possibility that the government will at least review the way in which compensation and death is dealt with in Afghanistan? Because it's quite clear there is real concern about it. And despite what you say, there is no enthusiasm in the Ministry of Defence to get these figures widely published?
Well, I tell you this, we do keep this constantly under review, and certainly I will look at it again to ensure that people who do have legitimate claims for compensation, where that can be proven, that they actually get that level of compensation. But I also want to assure you that we will continue to do everything we possibly can to avoid civilian casualties. That's not only the correct moral view, it's the practical political view to improve the situation in Afghanistan as well.
Defence Minister Bill Rammell talking to us earlier. Now, a decision on whether to release the great train robber Ronnie Biggs has been made. Christian has the details and more of the day's news.
Well, the great train robber Ronnie Biggs is to stay in prison because he's shown no regret for his actions. Despite a recommendation by the parole board to set him free, the Justice Secretary Jack Straw refused, calling the 79-year-old wholly unrepentant.
After the parole board recommended his release, the great train robber must have thought freedom a done deal. But the board had gone on to mention how even in prison, Mr Biggs was as unrepentant as ever about fleeing prison and going on the run for 35 years.
I have no debt with regard to society, none whatsoever. I've overpaid my debt.
It was this sheer brass neck that hit a nerve with the Justice Secretary. Jack Straw said today that Mr Biggs had avoided capture
by travelling abroad for 35 years whilst outrageously courting the media. Had he complied with his sentence, he would have been a free man many years ago. Biggs chose not to obey the law and respect the punishments given to him. The legal system deserves more respect than this. Mr Biggs does not regret his offending.
The train drivers' union backed Mr Straw's decision. The robbery left train driver Jack Mills with serious injuries. But those close to Mr Biggs say, apart from being a very poorly man, he is now sorry for what he did.
Ron at all times during his life has said that he's very sorry for what happened during the train robbery and any upset it did cause people, including Jack Mills and his family and stuff like that. So to say he's unrepentant is absolutely ridiculous.
Sorry or not, with his health deteriorating, it looks like he will now live out his days behind bars, still paying for his crime.
In the Commons tonight, the government has been defeated by just 3 votes over its bill to clean up Parliament in the wake of the expenses scandal. MPs voted to drop a clause that could allow parliamentary debates to be used in court as evidence, claiming it would curb their ability to speak freely on behalf of voters. Former Cabinet Ministers John Reid and Margaret Beckett were among the rebels. Justice Secretary Jack Straw said the government would respect the decision. British Airways has asked the conciliation service ACAS to help reach a deal with unions on jobs and pay after talks ended without agreement last night. The airline wants to axe at least another 3,500 jobs and implement a pay freeze. The unions had hoped the company would continue negotiations today, but BA management failed to arrive for talks. BA workers are threatening strike action over the busy summer period if an agreement is not reached. In another blow to the airline industry, Virgin Atlantic has announced it will reduce some services next winter with the possibility of up to 600 job losses. 9 members of staff at the embassy were at the British Embassy in Tehran were detained at the weekend for their role in protests against last month's disputed presidential election. Today, the Iranian opposition leader Mir Hossein Mousavi denounced the result, saying the next cabinet would be illegitimate.
The man who continues to insist he won the election is proving persistently brazen in his defiance. Mir Hossein Mousavi, who we've heard is now being moved around for his protection, unleashed a vehement denunciation of the result, again challenging the authority of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. It's a brave move, given that Iran's besieged militia today called for an investigation of Mousavi, accusing him of disturbing national security, punishable by 10 years in jail. On his website, he said President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's future government would be illegitimate. And in this headline article, Mousavi wryly observes the deafening silence from senior Shia clerics who have not condemned his challenge to Khamenei. It's because they can't lie before God, he suggests. Here, Mousavi recommends a form of silent protest. Keep your headlights on all day, he says. Mass demonstrations have died down, but new, undated pictures are still being posted on the web. It's believed that across the country, thousands may have been arrested now by police, Revolutionary Guards and besieged paramilitaries. Mr. Mousavi today demanded the release of detainees. He called them the children of the revolution, language pointedly suggesting a betrayal of the ideals of the Islamic revolution. In New York, international human rights groups claimed political prisoners in Iran were being forced to make false confessions.
We need the Secretary General at this moment and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to be sending a special envoy to Iran and asking for accountability to visit these detainees, to get them access to lawyers, to get a transparent judicial process.
Iran accuses foreign powers, particularly Britain and the United States, of attempting to orchestrate another colour revolution. The row over the detention of locally employed British embassy staff rumbles on, although tonight it's reported that all but one of the 9 originally arrested has now been freed. An Iranian news agency had earlier said one had played what it described as a remarkable role during recent unrest, managing it behind the scenes. The British government calls the allegations unfounded.
After the break, after decades of searching the moors for the missing remains of a schoolboy murdered by Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, police say that their search for Keith Bennett is at an end. You're watching Channel 4 News. Our headlines at 7:32 tonight. Now, the government is to take back control of the East Coast rail service after the current operator, National Express, warned it cannot afford to pay the money it promised to get the franchise in the first place. Government plans to privatise the Royal Mail have been put on hold. The proposal had been widely opposed by Labour backbenchers, but Business Secretary Lord Mandelson blamed the economic situation for the decision. This programme has obtained figures confirming that despite the difficulties of making a claim, British forces are to pay compensation for the deaths of 104 Afghan civilians killed in the last 18 months. Human rights workers believe the true death toll is much higher. The search for the remains of the only missing victim of the Moors murders has been called off after 45 years. 12-year-old Keith Bennett was killed by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley in 1964. Today, his mother, who has always hoped to bury her son, said she understood the police decision, but again called on Brady to reveal where the schoolboy's body was buried, as our North of England correspondent Nick Martin now reports.
And I'm hoping and praying to God that he will be found and it'll be through Brady.
She's hoped and prayed for 45 years, but Winnie Johnson, the mother of Keith Bennett, has today been told that the search for her son has effectively been called off. Saddleworth Moor on the outskirts of Manchester has never given up its secret. The whereabouts of 12-year-old Keith Bennett, who disappeared on the way to his grandmother's house in the summer of 1964. He was murdered by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, the Moors murderers as they became known. Britain's most notorious killer couple. Hindley is now dead. Brady is kept alive by force feeding after years on hunger strike.
For the last 6 years we have spent extensive time on Saddleworth Moor. We've done a huge amount of searching. We have had the cooperation of world-leading scientists to try and find Keith's body.
They've searched for decades on Saddleworth. In the 1960s they dug holes and volunteers scoured the landscape. In the 1980s Myra Hindley herself was brought back to recall where Keith Bennett's body was. This picture, released for the first time by police today, shows Myra Hindley on the moors. They were taken by Brady and are part of a collection. They're significant because the couple used these pictures to mark the graves. The police say that they've used just about every scientific method known and available to them in the search for Keith Bennett's body. But even that hasn't worked. The sheer scale of Saddleworth Moor is immense. It is 30 square miles. It's soaked with peat and it's wild and rugged. And the police today said the only person who can help them track Keith Bennett's body down is Ian Brady himself.
I hope he's found. I hope they find him so I can bury him.
And for 45 years Winnie Johnson has prayed. She's been far from quiet, often lobbying cabinet ministers, appealing to the public, but her main message has always been targeted at Ian Brady himself. Mrs. Johnson is now 75 years old and in ill health, but her appeal hasn't changed.
I won't give up, and neither will the police. And if they can get any information whatsoever off Brady, I wish to God they could do it, and I hope they do get it off him. It's got to be somebody. He knows where he is, and he's held it all these years, and I've had to suffer. He's got rights, and I've not, and it's not fair on me.
Ian Brady was approached by police in 2003 and asked to reveal where Keith Bennett's body was buried, but he refused. He rarely communicates with the outside world these days, but in a recent letter to Channel 4 News, Brady, now 71, wrote of his treatment at Ashworth Mental Hospital, his force feeding and his hunger strike. But interestingly, at the bottom of this letter, he reveals a little more and claims experts don't just think he's rational, but super rational, in the top 5% of the population, he writes. He signed the letter I.S. Brady.
Well, he says he's super rational, and he's compass mentis, as they say. Well, if he is super rational and he is aware of exactly everything that's going on, do the decent thing, do the right thing. Come forward and tell us where Keith's grave is.
If Ian Brady doesn't help police, only a major breakthrough in science will, and at the moment, neither is looking likely.
Nick Martin reporting from Saddleworth Moor. Now, he's more used to calling the shots over who's hired and fired, but tonight Sir Alan Sugar finds himself on the wrong side of the boardroom table. The government's new enterprise czar was offered a peerage in Gordon Brown's recent reshuffle. But Channel 4 News has learned that concerns raised within the body that appoints peers means it may be some time before Sir Alan becomes Lord Sugar. Our political correspondent Cathy Newman has this.
You're fired.
Get hired. Sir Alan Sugar has been able to make or break entrepreneurs with a jab of the finger. Now it's the businessman himself whose hope of promotion hangs in the balance. Channel 4 News has learned that Sir Alan's appointment to the House of Lords has run into trouble with the body that vets potential peers. Sir Alan was awarded a peerage when he became an enterprise czar in the government reshuffle last month. But a member of the House of Lords Appointments Commission told us the honour should be delayed until a sex discrimination case against the businessman is resolved. The member said there have been cases in the past where we have actually delayed the appointment until we are satisfied. This present situation falls into the same category. There's an allegation of sex discrimination. We don't know what the final outcome is. It's perfectly possible to be able to say, just hang on a minute, there are issues pending. Because once you've made an appointment, it's very difficult to rescind it. And tonight, a Liberal Democrat peer, Lord Oakeshott, has written to the Appointments Commission, also calling for the peerage to be put on hold.
I want the House of Lords Appointments Commission to wait until the result of some very serious allegations against Sir Alan have been settled one way or the other. A woman who is a director of a company he's taken over says that Sir Alan and his executives are bullies and are sexually discriminating. Clearly, if that's proved, he would not be a fit and proper person to sit in the House of Lords.
The Apprentice star has already faced criticism that his twin roles as BBC presenter and government advisor are incompatible. But the Appointments Commission is most concerned about the allegations of sex discrimination and bullying from this woman, Hannah Seabright, who was a top executive at a company taken over by Sir Alan last year. She's taking him to an employment tribunal, but the case won't be heard until the autumn. In a statement tonight, Sir Alan's spokesman said the businessman would vigorously defend himself at the tribunal. He added, Sir Alan is surprised that it was thought appropriate to join him personally to these proceedings in circumstances where he has only met the individual concerned on one occasion for no more than 10 minutes. The House of Lords Appointments Commission vets potential peers to see if they're fit and proper to sit in the chamber behind me. Its guidelines say that members of the Lords should be credible and in good standing in the community. But even some of Sir Alan's future Labour colleagues are worried he might not quite fit the bill.
We stand for dignity and respect. We stand for treating people decently and properly. We stand for equality. And the way in which Alan Sugar's programme promotes bullying, promotes sexism and its own sexist comments about women just fly in the face of all of that. So I don't see how it sits well at all.
Peerages for 4 Labour supporters were blocked during the Cash for Honours row. But former Speaker Michael Martin has just got his gong despite reservations from members of the Lords Appointments Commission. Sir Alan Sugar must now hope they overcome their reservations once again.
Cathy Newman reporting. Now, families of armed forces personnel killed since World War II had to get a new medal to recognise their loss. Christian has the details and more of the day's news.
The Elizabeth Cross will be granted to the next of kin of those servicemen and women who've died on operations. It's the first time a reigning monarch has given their name to a new award since the George Cross in 1940.
Around 8,000 servicemen and women have died on operations since 1948. Their families now to receive recognition for their loss. Each will be granted the Elizabeth Cross, made of silver, with the name engraved on the back. They'll receive too a scroll signed by the Queen, who spoke in a message to the armed forces today of the nation's debt of gratitude to the families.
This seems to me a right and proper way of showing our enduring debt to those who are killed while actively protecting what is most dear to us all. The solemn dignity which we attach to the names of those who have fallen is deeply ingrained in our national character. As a people, we accord this ultimate sacrifice the highest honour and respect.
What we wanted to do was recognise the burden that the families of those who have died for their country, the burden that they bear for the rest of their lives. And so this is focused very much on the families rather than the individual who died.
Both regular and reserve forces will be eligible, not just from Iraq or Afghanistan, but from operations since World War II, including Palestine, Kenya, Malaya, the Falklands and Northern Ireland.
Well, earlier today, the Queen was in Edinburgh to mark the 10th anniversary of devolution in Scotland. After meeting the First Minister and other party leaders, she urged the Scottish Parliament to continue to reflect the priorities and aspirations of all the people of Scotland during a speech in the new Parliament building. A vicar from East Sussex has been charged over an alleged marriage scam involving illegal immigrants. The Reverend Alex Brown was arrested following a series of dawn raids in the Hastings area yesterday morning, following an 18-month joint investigation into nearly 180 marriages. A Chichester diocese spokesman said the vicar had been suspended from duty. He'll appear in court tomorrow. The number of cases of swine flu in the UK has more than trebled in the last week. There are now 6,538 confirmed cases. London and the West Midlands remain the worst affected. The heatwave warning has been raised to level 3, just one short of an emergency, as Britain prepares for more high temperatures. The Department of Health has issued special advice for the elderly and other people at risk from the heat. But workers don't despair. The TUC has launched a campaign to persuade employers to allow shorts to be worn in the office, as temperatures in London are expected to reach 33 degrees tomorrow before cooling down this weekend. Other areas are cooler, with some parts expecting heavy rain later. There'll be a full weather forecast after the programme. The British actress Molly Sugden has died.
Hello, is that Mr. Akbar? Mrs. Slocum here.
She was best known for playing Mrs. Slocum on the TV show Are You Being Served for 13 years. Her agent says she died at the Royal Surrey Hospital after a long illness. She was 86. The markets now, and at the close, the index of 100 leading shares was up by 91 points. A short time ago, the pound was up against the dollar by 0.5 cent, and sterling was down against the euro by 0.8%.
After the break, as Michael Jackson's will is published, confusion reigns over whether or not he can be buried at his former home, the Neverland Ranch. A procession of vehicles arriving at the rundown Neverland Ranch in California has fueled speculation Michael Jackson will be buried there. But now those plans appear to be up in the air. The Los Angeles Times is reporting state officials said they couldn't clear the red tape required for a burial on private ground in time for the planned funeral this Friday. Our correspondent Sarah Smith is at Neverland now. Sarah.
Yes, John, the latest rumour is that the funeral now may be held somewhere in Los Angeles, but I have to warn you, there have been a lot of very contradictory rumours surrounding these arrangements. What we're hearing at the moment is that despite help from the Governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger himself, the Jackson family still couldn't get the official permission that they needed to bury a body outside of an authorised graveyard. They couldn't get that permission in time to have the funeral here at Neverland this weekend. But there are still plenty of fans turning up here, hoping that at some point Michael Jackson's body will be allowed to come home. Fans are here to grab whatever they can of Jackson's memory. faded white roses taken from a memorial wreath, at least a temporary souvenir.
You're welcome.
The flowers are being replaced as Neverland may be getting ready to welcome Michael Jackson back home. Even the arrival of a very large lawnmower ramps up speculation that a funeral, perhaps even a burial, could be planned for this ranch. And committed fans say they'll stay till that happens.
I'm here because I want to pay my respects, and it's a part of history, and I'm going to be here until Friday.
How are you feeling? Sorry. Good. Thank you, brother. Thank you so much.
Jackson said he was feeling great as he left his doctor's office just days before he died. There are now claims that as he prepared for 50 strenuous performances in London, Jackson suffered chronic insomnia and was pleading for a sedative so powerful it's usually used as a surgical anaesthetic. A nurse who knew Jackson said he begged her to find an anaesthetist who would administer the drug Diprivan.
I look at you, Michael, and I've been around you long enough now. I love you as family. I would not give this to anyone. This is not a safe medicine. Please don't take this. And I said, the problem with you telling me you want to be knocked out, those were his words, is that you might not wake up the next morning. You don't want to do that.
But it seems Jackson may have got the drugs somewhere. The coroner removed bags of medicines from Jackson's home, apparently including Diprivan. Ambulance crews found Jackson without a pulse, and Diprivan could stop someone's heart, especially if it was mixed with painkillers. If toxicology results reveal this anaesthetic, then police will want to know who administered it. Some kind of spectacular send-off for the singer is expected before we'll get any clear answers about how he died. When this ornate white carriage was spotted on the freeway, it was assumed it will carry Jackson's coffin through the streets of LA. Jackson's will was filed in court today, so we know that he left apparently $500 million in assets, but that doesn't take account of the substantial debts he ran up in recent years. And his will names his mother, Catherine, as the guardian of his 3 children, but it does also say that if she had died before him, he wanted the pop star Diana Ross to look after his children for him.
Sarah Smith in Los Angeles. After his 5-set late-night exertions on Monday night, today's 1 hour, 41-minute victory over the unseeded Spaniard Juan Carlos Ferrero must have been a welcome relief for Andy Murray. He's become the first Briton since Tim Henman in 2002 to make the semi-finals. Jane Death has this.
The weather was set for a scorcher on centre court, but the tennis was tepid in the first set, although Ferrero did show he can produce some very neat net play.
Excellent right there.
Murray only really came to life when he was just 1 game away from facing a tie-break, with a ferocious forehand response to Ferrero's serve. He unleashed the same shot seconds later and then took the first set.
He's a third of the way there.
It was Juan Carlos Ferrero who broke early in the second set, but when he was 3-1 down, Andy Murray pulled it back. He's learned how to fight back, and he went on to win the next 20 points. He was relentless, and Ferrero started to melt as Murray turned up the heat. In the third set, Andy Murray piled on the pressure, using every corner of the court to find the angle which would break Ferrero. He was winning his own service games in less than a minute. His serve was just too strong. And it wasn't long before he was serving for the match and a place in his first Wimbledon semi-final. He won 7-5, 6-3, 6-2. After Monday's 5-set epic, this was a straight sets breeze. At some point, Andy has beaten every player left in this tournament. There's a feeling this is his time.
People have seen it, with Andy Murray, someone who is passionate, and he shows his passion. Talks about his desire to win the tournament and to win other Grand Slams. And I think he is appealing to people now, because I think we see in him a winner.
But Roger Federer's a winner too. He got round the 6'10" obstacle of Ivo Karlovic to meet Tommy Haas in the last 4. It'll be his 21st Grand Slam semi-final in a row. If Federer wins his semi and Andy Murray can beat either Andy Roddick or Leighton Hewitt, we'll have the Murray-Federer final Wimbledon really wants.
Jane Death. And if you missed anything from tonight's programme, you can use the 7-day catch-up service on our website. But we're back tomorrow at noon and again at 7. Until then, from Christian and from me, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.